This keynote was originally presented at the ACM International Conference on Interactive Media Experiences in Stockholm, Sweden, at the Designing Meaningful Social XR workshop on June 12, 2024. I would like to give thanks to IMX, Miriam Wasmir, and Agnes Bach for inviting me to give this keynote about what I'm most passionate about: designing intuitive social XR spaces using insights from environmental psychology and architecture. Using a few designs of my own and other renowned designers, I will show how lessons from architecture and science can be used to create comfortable, intuitive, and even awe-inspiring social XR spaces to aid human connection and collaboration. In the context of my talk, the design environments I'm discussing are both immersive and flat-screen social 3D spaces that are designed for a specific use, including art galleries, expos, nightclubs, and work and meeting spaces, and targeting web-based platforms, PC VR apps, and mobile VR, and built-in WebXR, Unreal Engine, or Unity. Now, Winston Churchill supposedly said, "We shape our buildings, and afterwards our buildings shape us." Later, epidemiologists found that people who grew up in cities are more prone to mental illness than those from the countryside. And neuroscientists say that those of us who live in rural areas have a much lower risk of schizophrenia than those of us who live in cities. If virtual spaces makes us feel present in a place, and our limbic system holding so much power over our feelings, it makes sense to look to research in environmental science, psychology, and what it is teaching us about how our built environments affects us. But what makes a landscape or environment attractive to us? It turns out we really like places that provided safety and sustenance to our hunter-gatherer ancestors. Such environments provide changes in elevation, distant views of the horizon, relatively open spaces, water, large trees, a focal point, and some complexity. These characteristics are found in African savannas, but also in other environments. There are several theories of environmental perception, and I will offer you one. Stephen and Rachel Kaplan found that people prefer scenes that offer a combination of features that predict safety and nourishment in an environment. Places that are coherent, where we can quickly make sense of the scene with the help of repeated forms in a relatively uniform area. Places with legibility, the level of which an individual understands and can categorize a scene. Complexity, a scene with a richness and a certain number of objects in it. Without complexity, a scene is boring and not involving. And finally, mystery, the quality the Kaplans attribute to moderately complex scenes that contain hidden information or invites exploration. Researcher Colin Ellard has investigated the psychological impact of design and found that people's thoughts, emotions, and physical responses are strongly affected by our built environment. If a building facade has a uniform plainness, it affects people negatively, while the opposite is true for more varied and complex facades, like this Paris shopping street. In one experiment in Iceland in 2013, participants viewing computer-generated residential street scenes reported those with the most architectural variation having higher restorative qualities. One theory is that visually complex environments acts as a mental balm that reminds us of our natural surroundings. And we are deeply tied to nature. According to scientists, the color blue triggers associations with the sky and the ocean. Recalling a beach experience acts as a mental relaxation exercise making us more aware of possibilities afforded by our own imagination. Psychologist Joan Myers-Levy at the Carleton School of Management conducted an experiment examining the relationship between ceiling height and thinking style. When in high-ceilinged rooms, people excel at puzzles in which the answer touches on the theme of freedom, such as liberated and unlimited. And this is because airy spaces prime us to feel free. In contrast, people in a low-ceilinged room are perhaps not surprisingly much quicker at solving anagrams involving confinement, such as bound, restrained, and restricted. When test subjects from the University of British Columbia were put in a room in the color of blood, they were much better at skills that required accuracy and attention to detail, such as recalling numbers from short-term memory or identifying spelling mistakes. Scientists say that this is because people associate red with danger, making us more alert and aware. The positive effects of nature and natural surroundings on human well-being and productiveness are well documented in environmental psychology studies. A recent study from Stanford showed that when in wide open virtual spaces, students exhibit greater nonverbal synchrony and reported increases in many positive measures such as group cohesion, pleasure, presence, and enjoyment, versus when they were interacted in constrained surroundings. In Converse, a B2B metaverse platform for networking and realizing business opportunities, which I helped design, lobbies and exhibition spaces are relatively intimate and set in an open, nature-like spacious environment. The same Stanford study also showed that outdoor environments with elements of nature generated more positive feelings independent of the apparent size of the virtual space. The uplifting environment in the VR productivity app Nair is one example. In my design for Teleport VR, an immersive platform for inspecting and discussing 3D models in the AEC industry, I brought trees, water, and landscape inside the building. Large windows allowed ample views of the blue sky and the surrounding natural landscape. And while there are no real physical materials in virtual spaces, representations of natural materials such as wood should contribute to an increasing comfort and restoration among users of the space. The theory of prospect and refuge, made popular in architecture by Frank Lloyd Wright, seeks to describe why certain environments feel secure and thereby meet basic human psychological needs. Such environments provide people with the capacity to observe a prospect without being seen in the refuge. In Teleport VR, small pavilions with low ceilings acts as a refuge, where you look out at the prospect of a large circular plaza. This created secondary intimate meeting spaces, contrasting the main workspace. In my dojo design, the notion of prospect and refuge is much more subtle, where the main floor with tatami mats is circled by a mezzanine. The diffuse and even lighting plays a key role in creating a comfortable and zen-like atmosphere. But why do most virtual spaces look so similar to reality? In human-computer interaction, skeuomorphism describes interface objects that mimic their real-world counterparts in how they appear and how the user can interact with them. While there is no gravity or weather in virtual spaces, and technically no need for walls, ceilings, railings, or doorways, familiar affordances matter because they help people understand what the environment offers the individual and the possible actions that an actor can readily perceive. In my lobby design for VS Norway, a VR expo for maritime products and technologies by Ocean Visioneering, the use of 360 orbs floating over logo pedestals created a clear call to action for the visitors. When designing real and virtual architecture, you should make sure it has a human scale. If, on the other hand, you want to make a user feel small and insignificant, in particular in VR, you can make familiar elements like doors and stairs much larger than they are in reality. And if you raise a place or a building, it means that the place is important, special, and honorable. If you lower something down instead, it makes the place more intimate or humble. And while you may not think you need doors in VR, if you allude to a way out, you will create a more comfortable experience. We may not consciously think about getting out of a virtual room, but a space without doors or windows creates feelings of constriction and bears a resemblance to a prison. This is a nice segue for talking more about comfort, which should be front and center when designing social XR spaces. There are several ways to improve comfort, and making a space easy to navigate is one of the most effective ways to do it. Our experience of an architectural space is strongly influenced by our arrival to the space. In the real world, getting to a new place is the result of a continuous movement through a physical space. Like getting here to Stockholm, Sweden, from where I live in Son, Norway, by bus, plane, and then a bus again. Arriving at a virtual space, especially in VR, can be disorienting. For some users, feeling lost or disoriented can result in frustration and even discomfort. In architecture, lobbies act as a transition from outside to inside, and they help us navigate the building to get to where we want to go. A good lobby design makes it easy for a user to grasp the affordances, orient themselves, and create a mental spatial map of the place. In my proposal for a virtual museum for architecture, easy navigation was a key driver. In cutting a spiral into the sphere, the navigation ramp and the artworks are shown as key affordances, while the scene contains enough complexity and hidden information inviting the participant to explore the space. A recent VR study with mice indicate that elevated boundaries, or walls, and not floors, define space, and allows animals, and therefore likely humans, to create and maintain internal spatial maps based on their surroundings. Ashley Zelinsky's Unfolding the Universe, a James Webb Space Telescope VR experience, is an artwork created to commemorate the launch of the James Webb Space Telescope. It was developed in collaboration with Mozilla Hubs and the architecture of Metaxa Studio, with walls of particles that makes it possible to easily orient yourself in the entire exhibition space from any point of view in the architecture. Referencing urbanist Milton Weber in describing the essence of our cities, it is interaction between people and not the place itself that is key to a thriving community. The same principles should apply to designing virtual spaces. When Norwegian tech artist Rikke Jansen designed a club in VR chat for the Austrian DJ 10XX, she placed it in a wide-open, nature-like space, while creating a magical and intimate dance floor, allowing the guests to feel close together while dancing. For her previous club, a school of fish served as a living wall around the dance floor, and dolphins can be taken for a ride. It created a unique and awe-inspiring space that invited the guests to dance, socialize, and explore. As we've seen, there are numerous concrete aspects of nature we can learn from when designing social XR spaces, but we can also use nature as formal inspiration for its awe-inspiring designs. From truly magical places like the Antelope Canyon in Arizona, shaped to sublime beauty by water and time, or the ancient bristlecone pines of California, or Sunset Cliffs Cave outside of San Diego, California. While it is challenging to create awe-inspiring virtual spaces, it is possible. The VR chat world Namuanki by Kevin Mack is such a place. It was an official selection of the Venice International Film Festival in 2022. It has magical floating beings and wonderful landscape-side sculptures to explore. One of the few virtual architectural spaces that in my mind is both awe-inspiring and a work of art in itself is the Museum of Other Realities. It is a museum for native VR art designed by architect Samuel Arsenault-Brizard. Conceived through conversation, sketches, BIM models, and VR hand sculptures, Samuel's intention was to create a space that defied gravity, constructability, and materiality, but acknowledged artifacts of the gravity world. Similar to some large public architectural spaces, Samuel's use of scale, overlapping space, indirect light, and organic forms resulted in a virtual museum filled with awe. In concluding my talk, the key takeaways are: design environments affect a user's emotions, thoughts, and actions. We should aim to design for comfort and intuitive navigation. We can apply skeuomorphism selectively where we need it. And we should design for interaction between people first. And finally, we can be inspired by nature and should strive to create awe-inspiring spaces. If you're keen on more, there are podcast interviews, blog posts, and case studies on my website. You will also find literary references to the research and some of the projects in the comments section on YouTube. And do feel free to reach out to me via social media or email. And finally, thank you so much for listening.